Hello, welcome to our show. We are Business Love with Ryan. I am Ryan. Here we focus on what it takes to make your ideas happen and the steps you can follow to make it just a little bit easier. Subscribe to our podcast to join the ongoing conversation about all things startup business related. Find even more content on our YouTube channel, Ryan's Business Class. See the link in our description of this episode. So glad to have you here. Maybe we can learn something together. Enjoy. Hey, hello. Welcome to Business Love with Ryan. I am Ryan. This is our 7th episode, and today we are focusing on the medical industry. We decided on it today, obviously, because we're in coronavirus, and medical is on the forefront of everyone's mind. And it begs us to ask, is there innovations that could be made that would allow us to move into the future without such bottleneck of resources, especially a shortage of beds? I don't understand how that was possible. It seems to me that people have beds at home, and somehow if medical equipment was somehow portable or purchasable on an individual level, for instance, these respirators, then they could be administered at home, and a healthcare professional could come in, perhaps on shifts, and tend to the disabled person, perhaps on a round, perhaps every half hour you could have somebody come in and check on you, and then they go down the street to the next house, and then they go down, and they work in regions. Something like this. It's just off the top of my head right now. But when we were studying this medical industry and trying to brainstorm of different businesses that we could start, different industries that different business models that we could apply to this industry, you can't help but study startups, and you can't help but study, how businesses get going, especially in the medical field, without running across the story of Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes perpetuated one of the greatest frauds in the history of business. Well, that's one truth. In the history of medical business and in recent startup history, the last 30 years has been a very special time period in all of human history for innovation and technological advancement. And in spite of all of that, in spite of thousands and thousands and thousands of serious companies receiving serious funding, this story of Theranos and their $400 million of venture funding, and then the overall $9 billion of valuation that they were able to develop and claim for a while, until it turned out that that the promise of their company and the results that they had claimed and the track record that they, again, claimed to be building, it turned out to be fraudulent. It turns out to be some sleight of hand, almost like a magic trick performed on a real-life stage, an extended real-life stage, over time and in many locations and with some serious people. So we want to get into that today. So pretty much all of our sections, Tech Tuesday, Strategy Now, Business Supermodels, and Profiles of Success, all of them will sort of be focused on her. But I want to get into a little bit of news before we get started, just to bring us back to what's happening right now. There might be some business lessons about it, but it's just to sort of date our podcast, timestamp it. So the most important thing and the biggest piece of news that moved me this week was the antibodies test that's currently starting to be administered in many places. This is not a coronavirus test. It's not a test to see who has it right this minute. But instead, it's a test that can be applied to blood samples that have already been taken from different groups, for instance, pregnant mothers that came into a certain area during a specific period of time. They can test all those blood samples, and they can generally derive an understanding of how much of the population is reflected by this sample group. So, for instance, in California, over 100 pregnant mothers, and pregnant mothers would represent a general sample set of society because it's a natural, life process. So they took the blood of pregnant mothers because they're going to do this anyways, because when you're pregnant, your body is in a changing condition, and so they want to monitor your health as closely as possible, obviously for the baby. And they looked at these samples, and it turns out that something like 2 to 4% of the population within the sample demonstrated that they had coronavirus antibodies,
More than half of the people who were positive had no symptoms whatsoever. Some had symptoms, but they passed, and then there was a few, very small percentage of people that were exhibiting symptoms right now. However, in all of these cases, the coronavirus was not the reason for the visit. It was the pregnancy first. So there was no alarming situation in terms of they showed up at the hospital to get this addressed. It was a secondary result. So then again, in Denmark, they administered antibody test, again from blood samples, and they again got this idea that about 3% of the population has coronavirus antibodies. What that means is that we know exactly how many people have died. We can be sure that of all these deaths, we attribute this specific number, and that's not going to change no matter how many larger number of cases that we identify. So a larger number of cases with a consistent number of deaths implies that the death rate is actually much lower. It's probably not as low as the flu, but it's much closer to the flu than it is to projections of just a couple weeks ago where they were saying 3, 4, 5, 6% of people who get coronavirus will die. Well, that would be a horrible reality and extremely dangerous, but it turns out that we're looking at something like 10% of that or even 5% of that, which is still risky, still dangerous. We still need to take precautions, but of course we can open up the economy again. 3 times more dangerous than the flu is not reason enough to truly risk everyone's life by shutting down the economy. It's like, how about we just turn off your blood to protect you from some problem? Well, you're not going to live very long on the other side. So we have to balance that equation, between safety and general public well-being. Americans are in breadlines right now. So there's people who have never experienced poverty in the same way that are experiencing it right now, and they don't know what to do, and they're panicking. And already we're starting to see social unrest. So there is some risk that, riots could break out, demonstrations. People are already starting to demonstrate. And the question is, as Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York State, said, all of it's worth it if we can save one life. Well, is that true? What happens when people can't find jobs for a long time? Well, we already know that suicide, addiction, abuse, antisocial behavior will increase significantly as time goes by. We could see public demonstrations in the streets, which could lead to all sorts of violence and damage and just a general loss of productivity, even what productivity we can currently manage to create in this environment. You can imagine if this went on for a year that all of society would evolve to sort of fit the new way so that we wouldn't even start to feel the pain. It might take us a couple years if we had to live this way continuously, but eventually all of those dollars that are currently being invested in projects that can't function right now would be diverted into more remote functions or, on your screen. Money can go into this direction too. So, money would just go into new ways. But the question is, how much is one life worth? Well, it's not worth risking everything. So I want to go into Tech Tuesday, and I want to get back to our topic, which is, how to be successful in the medical industry. And so let's pause right here, and we'll be right back.